Hello, people of the internet. It's Eclipse, and today we're reading Melting Skies, Chapter 5. Without further ado, let's dive in. It had been a few sunrises since Minnow's fighting test. There were no confirmed results of the test by Alpha, but everyone acted like Roxo passed and she failed. Most, if not all, treated her like she didn't even exist. She heard some rumors about being an Omega, a rank that hadn't been given out in seasons. Somehow, though, she couldn't help but enjoy the peace that came with everyone getting off her back to be something. It felt refreshing to be nothing. She knew that as soon as she got her strength back, she would want to be something again. But for now, she didn't mind having eyes off of her for once as her wounds slowly healed. Noxima had stopped accosting her as well, the test marking the end of their contractual relationship. It felt like water to the dying, not having to be in the same space with that demon anymore. Minnow had started making it a habit to go out into the forest on her own to get drinks of water and hunt mice, as well as, minnows. Her biohazard mother's naming was a self-fulfilling prophecy. At least she had something to eat. And you know what? Hearing the birds above her and feeling the faint breeze pass through the tall grass surrounding her, it was nice. She could recall the only other time feeling so relaxed was when she was still nursing from Hersha. That would forever be her real mother. Spring was in full bloom. It was almost like she could feel the energy of the forest that surrounded her, cradling her and soothing her scratches and bites. The grass smelled and felt amazing, even when tangled in her tail. The streams were refreshing and cool for when the sun got to be too much on her black fur. So many sensations that she had yet to experience. She maneuvered herself to the tops of boulders and felt the wind pour in, carrying the scent from an unfamiliar place, far beyond their borders. Sometimes, if she placed her paws just right, she felt like she was flying, with the wind picking her up. She couldn't help giggling like a pup as she splashed in the rivers, climbed the rocks, and ran through the clearings, with some stumbles, stops, and tree collisions. But she didn't let those faze her. She was used to them. Everything felt so good. So... Minnow. A voice rang out within the forest. Minnow spun around. That sounded like a puppy. Much younger than Lavari's litter. Who was that? Minnow. A different voice called from the same direction. That was the direction of camp. Who was calling her? The voices were familiar, but at the same time. Minnow looked upwards in alarm as a thought occurred to her. The voices were familiar, but not familiar enough. And if they were coming from the direction of camp, were soul snares attacking? She began running the path most familiar to her back to camp, the voices getting louder with the wind matching her pace as she turned into one of the main entryways near the trainee dens. She felt herself knock into someone and whine as the other hit the ground. I'm sorry. She stooped to help him up, quickly recognizing his scent. Rigian, what's going on? Is there anything attacking? For a second there, I thought... No, what gave you that idea? I was actually going to find you. Oni's going to let us become trainees today. She smiled as she felt the impacts of his paws on the ground as he gave little hops of excitement. You'll watch, won't you? Well as I can watch something, she chuckled and nodded. Rigian giggled. Maybe whoever's training me will train you too. I know your mom wasn't a good teacher. Minnow could feel the slight wind shift as Rigian stuck his nose up and growled, making her chuckle again. Maybe, Minnow smiled and looked onward as she heard Alpha's call. Guess you're right. Get in there. She grinned as she heard Rigian run toward the clearing, with her slowly following. It was strange, as she stood shoulder to shoulder with wolves that had ripped her a new tail ever since she became a trainee, now murmuring under their breaths to one another, and by extension her, about how excited they were to see Lavari's litter succeed. It almost seemed like a fresh slate for the pack to prove itself to its young. Nobody seemed to notice or care when Minnow started murmuring too. Rigian shows exceptional promise. He's naturally curious, and from interactions with him, he's most likely inherited good genes for hunting and fighting. Minnow murmured to the random packmate next to her. She heard several small noises of agreement as other packmates started echoing her sentiment. It's true. Rigian had an impeccable nose, almost as strong as Minnow's, and his body was quick and agile. He always won the little races between him and his littermates. Every pup had different things to offer the pack, but Minnow was especially curious how Rigian would fare in training. He was quickly becoming one of her only friends. Even if his mentor didn't allow Minnow to participate in his training, he might be able to teach her more about life in the pack than Noxima ever could. They could learn from each other. Several paw steps sounded, and many wolves moved forward as Alpha made the call for those who had passed their assessments. Minnow stayed put with the queens and storytellers, watching with a kind expression. Up first was Batu, Rigian's younger brother, and 2 wolves, Bora and Stripe, volunteered. Batu was smart and chose Stripe over Bora. Up next was Rigian's twin sister, Ash. Ash chose Petal between Petal, Sabreeze, and Bora. Next was Malk, Rigian's older brother. Minnow couldn't help but wince when the only wolf willing to train Malk was Bora, but to be fair, it couldn't be worse than her situation with Noxima. Last was Rigian. Almost every top-ranking hunter and fighter offered their services to him when called upon. Why was Rigian taking so long to decide? Guess there were a lot of mentors to choose from. For a moment, Minnow felt his gaze on her. It lingered for a good several heartbeats before Rigian chose Patch as his mentor. As they began to trot off towards the woods, Minnow parted from the dispersing crowd and walked toward them. Patch was kind enough to address her. "Minnow, do you need something?" Patch halted, and Minnow could barely make out the sound of Rigian's tail swinging back and forth through the air. "Yes, Patch. I'm sorry to possibly intrude upon this relationship of mentor and trainee, but I was curious if I could train alongside Rigian. We have spoken about it previously." Before Patch could even answer, Rigian jumped in front of the old hybrid trainer. "Yeah, Patch. I thought Minnow might be able to learn from a different trainer. It wouldn't hurt, right?" Minnow's tail flinched with nerves as Patch hummed and thought. It's hard for me to admit this, young one," Patch began. "But it would most likely be above my abilities to train both of you, watch you, give you both feedback, and have you both assessed. I'm not even sure if Alpha would allow for it. However, I'll allow you to sit in on Rigian's trainings to see if you can't learn anything new from what I teach him, just so long as you promise not to interfere." Minnow let go of the breath she didn't know she was holding to speak again. "Thank you, Patch. It's very kind of you. I promise I will not interfere. In fact, I'll make it a point to make sure no other wolves affect the training." "See to it that you don't. I'm a firm believer that one never stops learning. Even so, there is a limit to what can be taught." Patch walked forth, and Minnow and Rigian followed, side by side. So guys, that was Melting Skies Chapter 5. Pretty short one, if you ask me. Let me know what you think of it in the comments, and I'll see you on the other side.